Hello and welcome to the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Companion Podcast, Part 1, presented by The Disorderly. Go to thedisorderly.com for the best in sports and entertainment. Follow us on Twitter at Disorderly Media, Facebook at Disorderly ENT, and you can find me on Twitter at Nick Risner, Nickrizner. So let's go. See, the beauty of all these top 10 lists coming out at the end of the year is a show like this, for me anyway. So last year I had somehow missed watching Marvelous Miss Maisel. Perhaps it was the fact that it was Amazon Prime. It wasn't really in my rotation as much. Anyway, David St. Martin had it on his list, so I watched it, and I absolutely loved it. Needless to say, I was excited for Season 2. The show had a ton of buzz, had a ton of success at last year's award shows, and the hype around this season was pretty high, so I was looking forward to it. It just dropped today, December 5th, and we're going to break this thing into a few parts. So I've done these companion podcasts with, weekly episodes, HBO shows, and I'll watch the episode, I'll release a recap of that episode, and do that every single week, right? But with these binge shows where they release the entire season at once, I've always sort of struggled with how to do it. So let's just say this. For the first one, I'm going to start with episode 1 and 2, and then we'll just see from there, I guess. But let's dive in. First of all, beautifully shot. Last year as well, but Season 2 really stood out, even just in those first 2 episodes. I mean, the fantasy elements of it, like the camera flip from New York to Paris. And I didn't plan this, by the way, when I decided to do episode 1 and episode 2, but it was kind of a perfect bookend where you had it flip from New York to Paris and then Paris back to New York. But we'll get to that, obviously. Actually, spinning cameras were super prevalent in this season in general, in both episodes. I don't know if that was a thing from Season 1 as well, but I just happened to notice it in this season, and it really created this cool element because in a lot of ways, it's almost like you're watching a Broadway play. The way this whole thing is shot, the breakneck speed of the dialogue, the constant sort of flustered performance, it creates for this really goofy atmosphere, and it plays really well with the characters, but it does have that Broadway play feel. Of course, when you're watching a Broadway play, you're sitting in your seat, right? You have a stationary view of everything that's going on. It really makes it feel like a film rather than, a play when you have the spinning cameras, you have the moving cameras, everything about the perspective changing. It's cool because it has that play feel, but also doesn't, and I like that. I mean, in general, the banter in this show, that's really the bread and butter. It almost has a feel of like an Aaron Sorkin film. We have the really fast dialogue back and forth. The jokes are kind of hidden in the pace of it. Like you'll hear something and you'll go back and still be laughing about what they said, and all of a sudden you miss like 3 different things, but in a good way. I don't think it's rushed. It's kind of a perfect balance of throwing in the humor while keeping the plot moving. I just liked it. Like, for example, I just jotted this down, so I might as well say it. When they first get to France and the landlord's following around, that older lady, and they're ignoring her, the camera's kind of panning with them, and they're ignoring her, basically screaming at them in French, and then Miss Maisel says she's drafting us. I don't know why, that was just hilarious to me to use that terminology like she's a race car. I mean, I don't want to beat the joke to death by explaining it, but yeah, it was just things like that, and there's a million examples of that. I just wrote that down, but that's kind of the appeal of the dialogue of the show, is it's so hilarious because they tuck little lines in like that, and it gives the whole thing a sort of whimsical feel. But getting to the actual plot now, episode 1 opens with Miss Maisel's mother moving to Paris, as I said, and her father basically go to try to get her to come back home. And there's some pretty obvious parallels drawn between Miss Maisel kind of scolding her mother and saying, "What are you doing? You're acting crazy. You have a husband. You have a life back in New York. Like what are you doing in Paris, basically chasing these dreams?" Even though, of course, the entire plot of the show is that she's doing the same thing, right? And they really took a long time to spell that out for you. They kind of had the audience see that first, and then the mother says, "Look who's talking," and kind of comes back at her and really hand delivers that parallel for you. But I do like how they kind of trusted the audience to pick up on that parallel first. Now, referring to Miss Maisel, too, Paris kind of gives her a chance to see that there's more out there. She sees, outlandish arts, at least by American standards. She goes to that drag show. She finds herself on stage in Paris again. I know this kind of annoys a lot of stand-ups, by the way. I've heard different stand-up comedians talk about this show and the fact that she just stumbled into it and she's a natural. And first time on stage, look at it, she's knocking it out of the park. That pisses a lot of people off because a lot of stand-ups, in order to really hone the craft, it's such a specific skill set, you really have to have 10, 15 years of bombing. So the whole story of going up and just being a natural, it's kind of bullshit. But whatever. We can make believe in TV land. Not everything's realistic about the show anyway. It doesn't make it any less entertaining. Although I will say that there is a little more realism to her killing overseas for the first time, because the comedy scene in Paris, especially back then, probably wasn't crazy. So they're probably seeing this kind of act for the first time, really. So it actually might kill. But whatever, we're getting caught up in stuff that doesn't really matter. Also, I loved that scene with the translator. I thought it was great. The fact that she was just on top of her. She'd go on these huge rants, and the translator had no trouble interpreting what she was saying and just kind of spitting it back out. It was obviously done kind of tongue-in-cheek, going back to that whimsical approach, and it goes back to the pacing that I love so much, and I just really enjoyed that. But then episode 2, we sort of see the increased challenge for Miss Maisel. She's right on the verge of blowing up into this star comedian, but the rest of her life is kind of holding her back, which is something that I think a lot of people can relate to. She's got this fractured relationship with her husband that she's still hoping to repair. She's got this normal life outside of the comedy scene, a regular day job, all this stuff, and you know, her family and what they would think of her, and she's just constantly worried about all these things. But that's in direct contrast to what she's trying to do in the comedy scene. She wants to keep rising up. She wants to get famous. She wants to get bigger gigs. That all comes with popularity. It all comes with her having to expose herself as this person, which obviously is kind of an alternative lifestyle, right? A lot of the women are not doing this. That's kind of once again the cornerstone of this plot. So she's embarrassed. She doesn't know what her friends and coworkers and boss and family will think of her if they know that this is what she's doing. This is how she's spending her time, right? So she doesn't want those two worlds to collide, which is getting increasingly difficult with this, oncoming fame. Meanwhile, Mrs. Maisel's parents are getting along wonderfully in Paris. So the father stays behind to convince the mother, I guess, to come home, but it seems like he's loving it. He's really diving into the lifestyle. They're getting along better than ever. They're really showing their love for each other away from the hustle and bustle of New York City. But I think the message here is that that's not really realistic. It's a dream, but it's only a getaway. I think he refers to it as a vacation. He's like, our lives are not here. Our lives are in New York. We can't just stay in Paris. And you can, of course, compare that to Mrs. Maisel's struggles between balancing her dreams and her more grounded, real-life type problems. And in the end, her mother chooses the practical life, but doesn't seem happy about it. And I'll be honest, when I saw this in the moment, I thought maybe that was foreshadowing how Miss Maisel should chase her dreams before it's too late and don't get bogged down by the minutia of everyday life. But then the father comes in with all these plans to sneak the mother into audit some classes at his college, to take dance lessons with her. It seems that this is showing that compromise is possible, that people can change, that you can take elements of your dream life and sprinkle them into a practical one and have it all work. And we'll see as the season goes, is the message that that's true, or do things go off the rails or whatever. But at least as it stands right now, after episode 2, it really is kind of an amazing message. Because I feel like you get all these starry-eyed people that's like, no, I'm going to sacrifice everything for my dreams. And then you get people who are too scared to even attempt their dreams and stay sort of locked into that cubicle office job. And people tend to look at that as a black and white thing, right? You can have one or you can have the other, when in reality, that's not true. You can have a balance of both. I love that message. And by the way, her stand-up set where she shit on the sort of hierarchy of male comics dominating the industry and how women are better suited for comedy because they're the most oppressed, and comedy comes from oppression. I mean, you might as well hand the Emmy to them right now. The Academy loves that shit. They eat it up. I'm not saying it's not accurate either. I'm just saying that is award bait. This is already on the Academy's radar, and I feel like messages like that will do wonders in earning them even more awards in the future. But well-deserved. It's an amazing show, man. I mean, this is a great start to the season so far. This really is one of the better shows out there these days, and from what I can tell, granted only 2 episodes in, but there's no indication of this season really being any different. It seems like it's still got it. It's still got its fastball. And that'll wrap up this part 1 review. So we'll be back. Like I said, I don't know how I'm going to split this up as far as episodes, but you'll see in the titles, obviously. But I'll do like 2 or 3 at a time, depending on when I see good points to wrap up and discuss again, depending on how much happens in each episode, until we get through all 10. So I hope you guys stick with us. I hope you subscribe to this podcast, tell a friend, leave a review, 5 stars, and then, of course, thedisorderly.com. Head over there. That'll do it for me. Part 1 of Marvelous Miss Maisel. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you're enjoying the show, and I'll see you next week.